wasn't too long ago that if you were going to think of a rear-wheel drive sports coupe, something from a Korean brand was just simply unheard of. Which is why when Hyundai shocked us all back in 2009 when it introduced the Genesis Coupe, the two-door version of its four-door luxury sedan, this thing really just made quite an impact at turning Hyundai's image from building bland, sensible, value-oriented vehicles to actually giving us something that is fun to drive that actually can compete with today's big market sports cars. Now, the Genesis Coupe has been out since 2011 or 2010. That was the first model year. What I have here is a 2012 Genesis Coupe. Now, I'd like to show you guys the 13. That was when the vehicle was actually significantly updated, but this 2012 model is still a really nice find in the used car market, and you can basically pick it up in 6 different trims. There's 2 engines available on the Genesis Coupe. There's the 2.0T 4-cylinder engine. That's the base model. There's 3 trims of that. You can get the 2.0T, 2.0T R-Spec, and then Premium. Now, what I have here is actually the 3.8 model. This is the 3.8 liter V6 engine that you'll find throughout the Hyundai family. Now, it has been separate or tuned differently for the Genesis Coupe, and you can also pick this up in 3 different sub-trims. There's the 3.0, 3.8T Track, Grand Touring, and R-Spec. Now, what I have here is the Grand Touring model. You can distinguish it as a Grand Touring from those 19-inch alloy wheels, the HID headlights at the front. It's got the leather interior with the spoiler on the back, and then the navigation system. This one's pretty much like the luxury-oriented model, and you're going to cross-shop the Genesis Coupe like this between like a BMW 1 Series and Infiniti G37 Coupe, and I gotta say the Genesis still looks pretty good. I am liking the refreshed model for 2013. For 2014, Hyundai actually hasn't even told us yet what they're going to do for the Genesis Coupe, but since a new Genesis sedan is coming out for 2015, expect this model to be redesigned soon. You can see the Grand Touring basically gives you some equipment from the track model. You'll have Brembo brakes, the 19-inch wheels. I mean, this thing literally, it's kind of like the Korean version of a Mustang, except it's much lighter, it's much more balanced, and you know, in terms of its looks, I think it's a decently good-looking vehicle. It's definitely bold, which Hyundai, they are definitely bold when it comes to design of their vehicles. Now, checking out the interior of the Genesis Coupe, it is completely different from the Genesis sedan. So don't think that this is just a coupe version of the Genesis sedan. This thing literally takes its own design cues, exterior and interior wise. Now, this is a pretty low slung coupe, so you have to duck your head and then fall into the vehicle. You can see the design aesthetics of this vehicle. They're interesting, not necessarily my taste. Hyundai did make some updates for 2013 on the interior materials and such like that, but because this is a Grand Touring model, just put your foot on the brake and push the button to start the engine. And I was quite surprised to hear that 3.8 liter V6 fire up. It definitely sounds different from all the other 3.8 liter engine Hyundais that I've driven. It's definitely that exhaust, and it actually has a pretty nice sound when you get into it. And unfortunately, I've got the model with the 6-speed automatic transmission. You can only get the Grand Touring with an automatic. If you want the manual, you got to step down to an R-Spec or a track model. You can see this touchscreen radio. This is Hyundai's older system. It doesn't have their Blue Link telematics, anything like that. It's a pretty older system, and the graphics are kind of... actually, the screen itself is kind of dim, and for some reason I wanted to show you guys the nav system, but the agree button doesn't seem to want to pop up. For some reason, it doesn't want to actually let me show you the nav screen. But the buttons here are kind of small. They are decently labeled. The climate control buttons here are much better, easier to use at a glance, but this will require you to kind of look away from the road. Not really a fan of it. The steering wheel on this vehicle, it's got a fatter bolstering extension. It's 3-spoke wheel. It's got paddle shifters mounted to the steering wheel instead of the column. I much prefer a Nissan Infiniti setup when it's mounted onto the column. Now, in terms of the materials in here, the materials are okay. It's not going to be at the same level as the Genesis sedan, but the coupe's not bad. Of course, you have some hard touch plastic here, but this upper portion here is slightly padded. This right here is hard touch plastic. And then if you look at the door panels, this is soft touch, just barely here with a chrome door handle, but you do have some more hard plastic here. A nice leather stitch area here where your elbows are going to rest. And then Hyundai gives you automatic up down for both the windows. Of course, there's only 2 windows, so it's kind of expected. Now, the 6-speed automatic transmission is what comes on the Grand Touring model only. You can get a 6-speed manual. The updated 13 models actually have an 8-speed automatic. For some reason that they didn't include a backup camera on this model, even when you put it in reverse. I'm not quite sure if the 13s have it. I'd have to double check that for you. You can see here storage. You have your iPod USB cable with a power outlet in here, a nice padded armrest. The glove compartment is on the smaller side, but it's decently sized. I mean, with a sport coupe, you're kind of gonna expect to have your practicality cut back a little bit, and the Genesis Coupe, it's not bad, but it's not like the Genesis sedan, of course. Now, of course, with any coupe, you're probably gonna wonder, what's it like to put people in the back seat? Well, the Genesis Coupe pretty much falls under the expectation that this is a really designed mostly for two people. You can see the headroom in here is pretty awful. That roof line is very, very low, and I'm only 5'7", and my head is pretty much on the ceiling. When you look at the materials back here, it's all hard plastic. So I mean, you're really only going to put people you don't like back here, or small children. Now, trunk capacity for a coupe is also not its strong suit. The Genesis Coupe is actually not bad when you compare it to its peers. The Camaro will have significantly less. This is pretty much on par with a Mustang. The Challenger gives you the most. Surprisingly, the seat still folds down in one piece. You have a pretty high lift over height, but a very small opening. You're going to look at about just under 10 cubic feet of storage in the trunk. So with such a long hood, which you're probably wondering what kind of engines you'll find underneath this thing. Well, my particular model has the 3.8 liter V6 engine. This is part of the Lambda 2 engine family, and RS stands for rear sport, I believe. 3800, that's the displacement, it's a 3.8 liter engine. Now this version does not have direct injection, but it still makes pretty good power, 306 horsepower and 266 pound-feet of torque. You can put regular gas in this thing. Of course, as a sport coupe, you'll probably want to put a premium in it for maximum performance. The 2-liter turbo 4 makes only 212 horsepower. I've read that you should probably avoid that and go for the V6. It's definitely the more performance-oriented option. Now, the 2013 Hyundai did update the engines. The 3.8 has direct injection, while this has port injection. That makes 348 horsepower now. But nevertheless, this thing's still pretty quick. You've got about a 3,400 pound curb weight. Fuel economy, if you care, with the automatic is rated at 17 in the city, 24 on the highway. Of course, this is rear drive. Let's take a look at how it all works together. So this is going to be my first time actually driving the Genesis Coupe. I've driven the Genesis sedan several times. I've driven the Equus, but the Coupe has been a model from Hyundai that's eluded me until now. And I gotta say, it will pretty much change your perception of Hyundai as a brand. And it's definitely something that you enthusiasts should try out if you've never driven the Genesis Coupe. So initial impressions are quite positive with this V6. It has a totally different character and feel from the other Lambda 3.8s that I've driven in the Hyundai lineup. Pretty potent, surprisingly, even with the 6-speed automatic. I mean, with 306 horsepower, you're going to look at a 0 to 60 time of maybe a tick under 6 seconds, probably about 5.9, something like that. If you guys go with the manual transmission, you should probably get around the same time. I mean, this automatic is a pretty quick shifting unit, and that V6 sounds incredible. I actually really like the sound of it. It really reminds me of Nissan's VQ V6. It has a very raspy, loud exhaust note, and it's definitely interesting. What I do notice is it remains surprisingly smooth, even when you start pushing it to its 6,500 RPM red line. Of course, it's a very smooth, linear power band, and there are times where I feel like it is a tad soft for my taste on a sports coupe. A Mustang it feels quicker than this, even with the automatic transmission. But I imagine if you guys drive the 2013 model with its direct injection V6 with almost 50 more horsepower, it's going to feel better. Now, in terms of handling, the Genesis Coupe will surprise you again. The steering is very, very heavy. It's very heavy, and it has a lot of feel, surprisingly. This is the first Hyundai product I've driven that's got a very heavy steering. Now, in terms of its precision, it's okay, but the car still feels a little bit nervous. It feels a little bit, I guess, I want to say it feels a little bit not as refined as some of the other sports coupes. Like if you guys drive a G37 Coupe or a 370Z, the steering will be better in this vehicle. This still has a little bit more fine-tuning for my taste. Now, being that this is a rear drive car, the back end will get a little bit feisty, and the V6 has enough power to break the rear end loose if you guys aren't careful. So for those of you who have never driven a rear drive car, be careful when you first put your foot down. That back end will get a little bit tail happy. So what about the rest of the driving dynamics. How's the ride quality? Well, it's pretty stiff. I mean, this is a low-slung two-door sports car, and you're gonna feel all the bumps through the roads, especially with those 19-inch tires. Now, it's not the worst. I mean, I've driven cars that have a much stiffer ride. Surprisingly, like if you guys drive a Kia Soul with the 18-inch wheels, it feels a little bit stiffer than this, but nevertheless, this thing is relatively stiff in its structure. I don't hear very many shimmies, very many shakes. It feels like it's built to a high-quality standard. It feels like it's built well. The visibility in here, it's a sports coupe. It's okay. I mean, the mirrors are a good size. The view from the front is good. The hood is nice and low, so the only thing you're really going to get annoyed with are these rather thick pillars here. The view out of the back is a little bit obstructed, but I am glad to say that spoiler doesn't take up any of your view out of the back. Again, that back end will get feisty if you put your foot down. Thankfully, the stability control will cut in and it will save your ass if you're not very experienced with driving a rear drive car. I gotta say, for most buyers, this 3.8 liter V6 is a great choice. It has plenty of power. It makes a nice sound. I read that the 2 liter turbo really isn't the best of choices. I haven't driven the new model with its upgraded power, but this automatic transmission is very smooth. It shifts well. It's very well matched to the engine's power band. I only imagine that the 8-speed automatic is even better if you guys are going to drive the updated model. A couple things I'm not really liking about this Genesis. Again, I'll touch base on those. The ride quality is not great. It could use a little bit more fine-tuning in the steering and the suspension. I don't really understand these gauges right here in the center stack where it shows you your torque, and then of course there's the instantaneous MPG. You don't need that for a sports car like this. The torque is kind of just a silly little meter that shows like this little grid going back and forth. It's kind of pointless to me. But other than that, I mean, this car is quite a surprise for any buyer who's never driven a Hyundai like this. It's very fun to drive. It's pretty quick, and it handles well, especially around corners. The steering feels good, other than it just could use a little bit more fine-tuning in the way it feels a little bit nervous at times. But, you know, overall, I'm quite impressed with this thing, and it's definitely the lightest out of the 3 muscle cars. If you're going to buy this car, you're going to compare it to the 4-cylinder version. You'll compare it to like a BRZ and FRS. This V6 model would be compared to a Mustang, a Camaro, an Infiniti G, a Nissan 370Z. And the Hyundai actually gives you a nice balance between performance and space on the inside. I mean, it's got a back seat, which the Z doesn't have. It's got a bigger back seat than, say, a Camaro or a Mustang. And then the trunk capacity is better than a Camaro as well. So in terms of price, Hyundai has priced the Genesis Coupe relatively well. This 3.8 model that I'm driving is going to be in the mid $30,000 range. If you go for a 4-cylinder model, it'll be below $24,000. So, well, that said, hope you guys have enjoyed my overview of this 2014 Genesis Coupe. If you're in the market for a sports car or a sport coupe, make sure you check this one out. It's definitely worth a look. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll catch you all later.